Welcome to the SRNA Ask the Expert podcast series, Research Edition. I'm Krissy Dilger with the Siegel Rare Neuroimmune Association. This is the 6th episode of Parenting is Hard, a mini-series exploring an often overlooked but deeply important topic, the experience of parents raising a child with a rare neuroimmune disorder and how this impacts their other children. Joining us for this special series is Barbara Babcock, a family therapist with the UK's National Health Service. Barbara has conducted insightful research into how parents navigate the needs of their non-diagnosed children alongside those of a child with a rare neuroimmune condition. Through this series, she'll share her findings and offer guidance for families facing these unique challenges. Barbara holds a Master of Science in Family Therapy from King's College London and a Master of Arts in Coaching Psychology. You can find her full bio in the podcast description. SRNA is a nonprofit focused on support, education, and research of rare neuroimmune disorders. You can learn more about us on our website at wearesrna.org. This episode was made possible in part by the generous support of Amgen, Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease, Genentech, and UCB. Please note at the end of this mini-series, we will host a Q&A episode where Barbara will answer questions from the community. To submit your question, please visit srna.ngo/submit. You can also find this link in the podcast description. Thank you, Barbara, once again for joining me and discussing the research you have done into how parents approach parenting with a child who has a diagnosis of a rare neuroimmune disorder, as well as that child's sibling. So we are now going to discuss theme 4, and the theme is support from siblings makes parents' lives easier. So can you please just introduce that theme for us? What are some of the surrounding factors that made sibling support important to parents?
Well, this theme was something that I noticed was very prevalent in the data. And it was in the context of discussing with the parents, what kind of support do you draw on? Why that support? What support do you have available to you? And out of the 6 families taking part, 5 said, we do not have practical ongoing support from extended family. And oftentimes that was due to they didn't have extended family living nearby, or extended family weren't in a position to help consistently. So the families were pretty much doing it on their own. And it's really tough to be doing it on your own because you don't know what you don't know. And it was the most prevalent form of support across all the different types of support parents drew on. The sibling was the most prevalent. And I thought that was really interesting. So the parents were saying, because they didn't have that practical ongoing support from family nearby, they were saying, we have to manage it ourselves. And so that can magnify the impact carrying responsibilities that the parents have and the impact on their availability for the siblings. And whether explicit or implicit, it probably drawing on that sibling support, it could alleviate some of the constraints they experience, some of the concerns they have, some of the workload that they feel that they have if they know that the sibling is there helping them out. And they talked a variety of ways in which the siblings helped.
Great. Thank you. So how do siblings' characteristics play into the dynamic of the family or how they participate in helping the household function?
It could be a number of ways. Like 4 families refer to the characteristics of they get on with it. They cope really well. They're really helpful. They're flexible. they're independent, and the parents really appreciated those qualities in their children. So one family member talked about the elder child. They could just drop them off at clubs. The kid loves having a go at stuff. And the parent was really grateful because it's like, well, that's easy because if I need to attend to the child with the rare neuroimmune disorder, then okay, this one, they can go to a club and they love it and they enjoy it. That makes my life a bit easier. And I'm really thankful for that. And as a parent, of course you would be. Of course you would feel that way. And then some say where it's quite a young child, maybe about 4 or 5, where the parent found them really flexible and helpful. The mothers like would turn around and they would already have socks for the child with the rare neuroimmune disorder because it was really important that they looked after the condition of the feet so nothing would happen. So change into fresh socks after being out and about. And here their younger sibling was getting them for their elder sibling who has the rare neuroimmune disorder. And there is something there. Children are watching and learning. And so they're like, right, okay, this is what I could be doing. This is how I could help. And there is something around siblings helping is across the research literature. When you look at the role of the sibling in the family, oftentimes they do help. It's not uncommon for that to happen.
That's awesome. Yeah. I am interested to learn more and during our discussion about that dynamic. So to that end, in your research, did you find that siblings would volunteer to help?
Yes. And I was really surprised at this. 5 of the families refer to how the siblings helped regardless of age and regardless of gender. From a 4-year-old young girl to a 16-year-old male, they voluntarily helped the parents. And I see this in my own family. For example, a nephew, when he was 2 years old, when his father, my brother, opened the dishwasher, he toddles up, starts to get a plate out and hand it to the father. He's mimicking what the parents were doing and voluntarily going to help. And there are a number of reasons why young people do this. It could be, helping with caregiving activities, which was common with 4 families. It could help with daily routines and chores in the house. 3 families spoke about that. It could be asking or looking after the parents' well-being. 2 families spoke of that. Or maybe it's the young person, the sibling looking after their own needs, whether it's hygiene, brushing their teeth, changing their clothes, helping out with meals in whatever shape or form. But it's they would do quite a lot. So some of the examples that I have here is the eldest child, the 16-year-old male, was saying, actually, I'll take her out to the shops or I'll take it to the park. I'll give you and dad some time. You've been like ships passing in the night. You haven't had much time together. So the eldest child, who is the mother thought, well, they were on the cusp of possibly doing that anyway, given their age, saying, oh, I see there's a lot of there's a lot of effort for the parents in looking after my sister, so I'm going to help out. And this helps them to look after themselves. And in some ways, I think children automatically do that because research shows that parental mental health, parental well-being will have a direct impact on child's mental health and children well-being. So in some ways, children want to look after the parents to make sure they're in a good enough place to look after them. So I'm not surprised that we came across this. And you see how young people, like 4 years old, they'll see what the parents are doing and they'll get on with what they need to be doing. So one parent talked about a 4-year-old sibling saying she's really independent. She probably sees that we have to do all these extra tasks with her sister that we don't do with her. So she goes to brush her teeth. She knows the routine. And then even go downstairs afterwards to get mugs for the hot milk before bed. And there is something for young children. This could be a form of play. I'm playing house. I'm helping mommy and daddy. And in some ways, isn't a bad thing because the children are learning about chores in the house. It takes people to work together to get a meal on the table, to do laundry, to tidy up. And this is a way of them getting involved. But there is also another side of this where parents would talk about providing an opportunity for the sibling to talk about, well, how's it going for you? Trying to give them opportunities to talk about how they're feeling. And they could create these opportunities. The children, the siblings don't talk. They're not sharing how they're feeling. And that too is commonly found in the research literature where you have a child who has additional needs due to a physical illness and possibly disability, where they don't want to worry. The parents have enough. I don't want to be adding to their burden or adding to their stress. So children will withhold that as well, even despite parents giving them the opportunity to talk and to share.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I am particularly interested in that portion of your research because it can be difficult to share your feelings when you already know as a child, your parents are dealing with stress and other emotions, and you potentially don't, you think you're helping by not burdening them.
Yeah.
So, so I guess going off of that, can you talk more about how parents can try and open that chasm, I guess, or open that box so that their children, the siblings, do feel the room to communicate how they're feeling? And what are the potential negative consequences of withholding feelings from parents?
Well, we have to consider the siblings' chronological age and their development age. So a child could be 12 chronologically, but developmentally they might act more like 10 or 11 or 13 or 14. So it can go either way. So there's being mindful of the child's development age. What are they showing? We also have to consider a 10-year-old, a 12, a 13-year-old. It can be really difficult to articulate how they're feeling. So, and it also links to how emotionally literate the family is. So, do the parents recognize how they're feeling in themselves? Can they name and acknowledge their own feelings? I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling joyful. I'm feeling hopeful. So, if the emotional literacy isn't very high in the family, it can be harder for a parent to support a young person to articulate their emotional feelings. And it's also not just emotional literacy, it's the relationship with emotions. So oftentimes we could think of, quote, I say, quote, negative emotions such as anger, sadness, frustration. Well, we should not feel that way. And I often tell people all the emotions are valid. It's what makes us human. It's about how we respond to it. Also, emotion has the word motion in it, and motion is about movement. So, how do we let these emotions flow through us? How do we let them flow through the family, recognize and acknowledge them? So, when you have younger children, 5, 10, even 13, they might not have the language. So, as a parent, you may have to say, I noticed how when, your sister, maybe the one with the rare neuroimmune disorder, did this, and I asked you to do this, you went and you seemed a bit frustrated there or angry. Which one was it? I'm really curious. What were you feeling angry about? Are you feeling like you're always having to help and no one's helping you and you want some help? So it might be that you need to provide some suggestions to younger people. Also influencing it, in addition to emotional literacy in the family, in the child's development stage and chronological age, reflecting back what
Mhm.
you noticed, what you saw, making sure you're letting the child know you're not in trouble. You're not in trouble. I just want to get to understand you a bit better. How are you feeling
Mhm.
about things? And for some families, they may do this already. Other families, maybe not so much. And they're having to do it now because emotions are more heightened in the family due to this physical illness coming through. I was saying before about voluntary help can be a demonstration of concern, emotional care, a form of play, imitating parents for younger siblings. It could be a way to reestablish one's role in the family. Because when you have an illness come into the family, maybe accompanied by disability, the different roles people play could just be thrown up in the air. And it's like, okay, so if I help out, then this could be my role in the family. I help my mommy, I help my daddy, or I help my sibling. Um, and it could also be used as a bid for connection with the parent. This is how I now need to get my parents' attention is by helping out. Now, I didn't find that in my study, but I also didn't interview the siblings. If I had interviewed the siblings, maybe that would have been the case, but I don't know. But in other research where they look at sibling report, and there is a study by Akhtar et al. In 2012, which was conducted at Stoke Mandeville here in the United Kingdom. And there were several young people with transverse myelitis who took part in that. And that study did find that voluntary help was a bid for connection in some of the young people. But on the other hand, a form of helping if it's age appropriate caregiving tasks and illness knowledge. So the young person knows about the illness sufficient for their age and development stage, and they do get involved in some tasks that again are appropriate for their age and development stage. That can help to lower sibling anxiety. It could develop adaptive coping skills. It could help with the siblings' well-being, and it could enhance the sibling relationship in between the young people. And for the families, we're showing that in how they describe the relationships.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I I think it's what you said specifically about how it can help the relationship between siblings. It's
Mm,
really important because that's another factor that I think as parents you might worry about, but to know that's a reinforcing factor when the siblings help out.
mm,
That's really positive,
mhm,
really positive
mhm.
thing. So, did parents express that they received emotional support from their children who are the siblings of the child who's diagnosed, or just support in the sense of taking care of responsibilities?
There was a couple of families mentioned where the sibling would go to the parent and be like, "Are you okay? Can I give you a hug?" So that I did come across that, and I think yeah, I'll get it. We'll be talking about this in a bit. That can be entirely okay because I mentioned in one of our previous podcasts, one of the earlier ones, how we have this intensive form of parenting, particularly around mothering, that you have to be the expert in all your children and do everything right, know their needs intimately, and you take care of all their needs. And this intensive form of parenting has it like puts the child, if you use the child as in a vulnerable position, they can't help. Helping is a one-way activity, parent to child. But children do help. Like that personal example I provided of a family member. Children want to help oftentimes, which we saw with the voluntary helping. So it's about how we can, support them to help in the way that they want to help, that's appropriate for their age. And of course, they're going to help emotionally because the parent does that for the child. The child is learning it from somewhere. And it's appropriate because they're learning how to show empathy. And of course, we want to raise our children to be empathetic human beings, capable of receiving love and giving love. Now, sometimes it could be the child is worried for the parent. Is my parent in a good enough place? Can they look after me? That could be a subliminal thing going on, but it could be that they genuinely care for the parent. So, as a parent, to have your child recognize and say, well, thank you for recognizing that. Let me give you a hug. And there is something mutual in that. The child saying, I want to give you a hug. I care about you. And the parent then saying, well, thank you for that. Let me give you a hug too.
Yeah, that's great. I don't think you have to automatically categorize a parent showing their emotion and leaning on, their child who's a sibling a little bit as an inherently negative thing. I think there can be positive outcomes when done, as you mentioned, in an age appropriate and controlled way. And we've touched a lot now about voluntary support from siblings helping out with responsibilities, establishing their role in the family. How did parents set expectations for siblings? And what sorts of responsibilities or activities were expected of siblings?
Some parents did explicitly expect the sibling to help out, and for families shared how they did this, whether it was to look after themselves or with caregiving activities or household chores or being the companion of the sibling who has the rare neuroimmune disorder, maybe a disability as well. So it could be, like household chores, not a problem. In one family, asking the sibling, okay, be a companion to your sibling who now has this disability. And there was a bit of a, no, actually, no, I don't want to do that role. I don't want to have to be their companion. And so sometimes you will see children be, oh, I don't want to have to do that. Some of it could be that they make their own lunch. It could be that they walk themselves to school. It could be fetching things for the parent. And sometimes you might have a child who has a higher level of disability, say a tracheostomy. And so if something's happening and the child with the tracheostomy is struggling, you've got to sort that out ASAP as the parent. And so, of course, you will be asking the sibling, can you get XYZ for me? And that does happen. And sometimes in those moments of emergency, the family does have to come together very quickly to sort out something like an emergency where the young person's life is, if it's not sorted out, then that's not great. So the family will come together very quickly to sort that out. And parents, again, they were really grateful for it.
That's great. And I think something that comes to mind when we're having these discussions of the siblings taking responsibilities and sometimes helping out with caregiving duties here and there. It can be tricky as a parent to find the balance between setting expectations for your child and crossing the line into parentification, which is a word that I don't know if everyone fully knows what it means. So to start off, can you explain what parentification is and how it relates to your research?
So parentification is when a child adopts a parental role, either voluntarily or by parental invitation or expectation, which could be implicit or explicit. And the child becomes part of the parental subsystem. And that role of helping becomes part of the child's identity. So now it wasn't my job as part of this research to make that assessment. Is this child is parentified? This child isn't parentified. I wasn't doing that. But because the sibling helping the parent, it was so prevalent across the families, across the data that I collected, it was a consideration in my discussion chapter about parentification in families where one sibling has additional needs. And this could be in the case, say, you might have one child who is neurodivergent and has additional needs. One parent said, as part of this research, that when you have a one child with additional needs, they have the greater needs, so you have to prioritize them. And then sometimes you may recruit the sibling to help out, like I just said, in times of emergency or to help out with chores in the house, which is normal part of growing up. You want your children to be functional adults. But you can have this thing where children end up, it becomes part of the role. They're invited into the parent subsystem. You can see that where there's conflict between the parents. So I'll just really quickly, if you have two parents and then a child with a rare neuroimmune disorder and the sibling, if the parents here aren't getting along, they're fighting. A parent could say, okay, well, you help me. They're useless, but you and we could sort this out. You help me look after this child. And so they become part of the parental subsystem. And that parent could become alienated. And so then that child, the sibling, can have a more of like, okay, well, I help daddy or mommy or whoever with my sibling who requires additional support. And if that's part of their identity, then that could have knock-on implications for that young person and later in life. So do their needs get a look in? Is the parent attending to that sibling's needs, or is the sibling have to actually look after not just their sibling, but their own needs as well? And so that could be an unhelpful form of parentification because the siblings' needs are being subsumed with the other child who has the additional needs. So their needs don't get a look in. And that's a maladaptive form of parentification. And it's not uncommon in families who have a disabled child. It's not uncommon where there's marital conflict. And it's not uncommon in single parent families. So there'll be a number of our families where there is just one parent and they're having to do it all. So yeah, they are going to recruit the older siblings to help out with the younger siblings. And you see that in single parent families where you might not have additional needs, such as a rare neuroimmune disorder or disability, for example. So it's very much about assigning these appropriate age and development stage caregiving tasks and household chores. And that when it's age appropriate, development stage appropriate, then that could be an adaptive form, a really useful form of parentification. That could just be learning about how you work together as a family and help one another out. It could support developing maturity in caring and social skills. So it is a tricky balance. And there is something I want parents to, as they listen to this podcast, and this one in particular, to show a lot of compassion for themselves. It's not like you're given a handbook on, oh, watch out for parentification, adultification. You don't always get that handbook or anything. So, if you find, oh gosh, maybe I do rely on them more. So, like another form where parentification can happen is where the parent is confining in the children with adult themed topics. Like, your father did this and it really annoyed me, or your mother did this, or the other parent did this and it really frustrated me, da 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 da. If they're consistently venting about the other parent to the young person, that can foster parentification in a less useful way, because the child might think, oh, I have to emotionally support my parent, but I can't get emotional support from them. So there is something around how we're attuned to this and how we deal with it if we think it's happening, but also how can we foster it in a useful way with, again, the chronological age appropriate and development stage appropriate caregiving tasks, household chores. An 8-year-old, they can learn to make their bed potentially. A 6-year-old may be able to pick up their laundry and put it in the basket and tidy up their toys. So linked to that, and this is what we talked about a little bit before in two things. Siblings may withhold information to protect their parents and family from additional stress. And so an indication of that, it might have been happening. I can't say for sure in the families I spoke with. A lot of the parents were saying, I don't know what they're really thinking and feeling. But keep in mind, children may not be able to articulate how they're thinking and feeling. The parent might have to make some suggestions, but hold them lightly. Is it this? Is it this? Is it something else? And it's about creating those opportunities to talk and having that one-on-one sibling time where the young person can talk about their worries, which we spoke about how parents did that in a previous podcast. But it might be that the research has found sibling might not want to talk about it. They might not want to talk about their feelings at all because they're having to deal with this situation day in, day out, and they just might not have the energy to do that. So it can make it difficult for the parents to then attend to siblings' needs. And so you could get into a bit of a vicious cycle. The sibling doesn't want to talk because they're fed up, but they don't want additional stress. The parent doesn't know how they're thinking or feeling. They create opportunities for the child to talk. Sibling doesn't want to talk. And the parents might think, oh, they're doing okay. Okay, we'll give them some additional. They can help out with this. They can help out with that. And then the siblings, might show that they're coping well, but on the inside, they could be, oh, well, no one looks after me. And they might not even be able to articulate that. And so that can further compound the sibling feeling obligated, isolated, no one can care for them. So if they're in mutual caregiving roles and there isn't sufficient open communication, then that could add to the stress in the family system.
Yeah.
There was another point around parentification. In our society, it's a real Western concept around, well, children should have a childhood. And I was talking about that intensive parenting approach where the parent does everything. It's one way, parent help child. And there is something to that, but there are other cultures where you might see a 5-year-old or a 6, 7-year-old carrying around a 2-year-old, playing with them, looking after them, helping out. And these are very different cultures. So different cultures will have different ways of approaching this. And it's not right or wrong. It's about what is appropriate for the family, what is appropriate for the children, and how does everyone in the family get their needs met or a decent amount most of the time, knowing that is a tricky balance that probably will never be perfect, and what balance look like will change from day to day.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a lot of good information and a lot of healthy ways to look at these tough topics, because it can be overwhelming, I think, for parents, and the need to be always perfect can come into play. And I know we'll discuss that a little bit in the next podcast when we talk about theme 5. But I appreciate you explaining that theme of parentification versus establishing healthy responsibilities and expectations, because that is something I think a lot of parents.
Yeah. And yes, it is challenge in a family where you can have one or more children with additional needs. Very much so.
So what advice would you give parents who want to foster a healthy, supportive sibling relationship in this context?
I come back to open communication in the family. How do parents role model it with the other parent, whether they're together in a committed relationship or not? So how do the parents role model? Because they're the first role model. So how they relate to the other parent, but also how does the parent relate to their siblings? And how do the children see that? That's another way. But it's also knowing your kids as best you can. You won't be perfect, but their likes, their dislikes, if they want to help, if they're voluntarily helping. I appreciate, though, it was sometimes when kids voluntarily help, a task that you could do in 10 minutes, if they get involved, it's going to be 40 minutes or an hour. And you might not have that. So how can you let a young person help for some of the time at least? Because they know, oh, when I voluntarily go to help, take the dishes out of the dishwasher or do this, it's valued, it's welcomed. What message are we sending the children around voluntarily helping, but also receiving help as well? How do you role model receiving help? In Western society, it can be very much individualistic culture. You have to be very self-reliant, and that is prized, and don't need help. And it becomes very imbalanced because then we're expected helping people is good. But if everyone's helping and no one wants to receive help, we get into a bit of a bind. So it's really important we role model with our children how we receive help in addition to how we give help. And there is something around siblings. What do the siblings want to help with? Maybe it's just playing games with their sibling, like any sibling would do, regardless whether one or the other has additional needs. Maybe they can go fetch something, help out with that. Again, it's what is appropriate to their developmental stage and to their actual age.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I believe that's the end of the questions I have for you. I did want to open the floor in case you have any final thoughts on this theme before we wrap up.
Let me see if there is anything else. I think that's everything. I think that's everything around this theme for now. It is a big topic and it's prevalent across the literature. the chronic illness research, whether it's parent report or sibling report, support from the siblings is a factor that has been looked into. And so it is a popular topic,
Yes.
I would
Yes.
say.
Yes, and very important, I think, as well. And I'm glad to have the chance to have a conversation around it because I do think talking about these dynamics talking about it is important
Mm-hmm.
because if you're suffering in silence, so to speak, you might not realize that it's more common than you think to be worried about. Or am I putting too many expectations on my child who is a sibling of someone with a rare diagnosis, or if they're volunteering to help a positive thing, or am I burdening them? So these conversations are super important, and I appreciate you sharing us the research that you did into it.
Yeah, I think one of the comments I wanted to make earlier about relationship to help, emotional literacy in the family, the parents, the relationship with the emotions, is what was the parents' relationship like with the siblings prior to the rare neuroimmune disorder coming into the family? That will also impact how things are. So if it was, say, a fraught relationship, it the parent may have to put in even more effort after this, doing relational repair if there were ruptures in that relationship. They might have to put up even more effort into that relational repair with the sibling. But interestingly, a number of the family said, I don't know, come back in 10 years and ask me then. Because then the children might be 20 or 20s or 30s and be in a position where they could really talk about, well, this is how it impacted me back then. Now I can articulate how I feel. But there is something, the sibling from the age of 10, 15, 20, 30, up until they're 50, their perception of their experience having been a sibling of someone who had additional needs, that their perception of it could evolve over time as they grow and have new experiences in life. So it may not be a static thing. It could change. So yeah, and just one other thing that came up, it, not so much in my research, but it was in other research papers where like in some families, parents may say, right, we're going to prioritize a child with a disability. They'll get all the attention, all the time, all the effort. That is my goal now, is to focus on this child. And then it might be up to the other parent to focus on the other children and their needs. Parents will make different choices about how they approach that together. Or they might not approach it together. It might be that one prioritizes and the other says, well, I better focus on the others. They might actually agree, no, let's do it this way because that's easier. So they have different approaches. In some young siblings can say, oh, well, yeah, they always get the attention. They get preferential treatment. They don't get in trouble as much. We get in trouble. So you can see some of that. I didn't see as much of that. There seemed to be a lot of what I referred to in a previous podcast around parent mutuality, where the parents were actively communicating and working together to decide, right, how are we going to approach this? You work with that kid that day, I'll take that kid. Then we'll swap over for the bedtime routine. And so there wasn't a lot of open parental conflict. I'm sure there might have been some. Conflict is inevitable. But it wasn't so much as one of the papers that I drew on in this research.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for sharing and for joining me once again on a very enlightening and interesting episode of this series. I wanted to remind everyone who's listening that if you would like to submit questions for our Q&A episode, you can do so at srna.ngo/submit, and that link will be in the podcast description. Thank you again, Barbara, and I look forward to our next conversation.
No, thank you.
Thank you to our Ask the Expert sponsors, Amgen, Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease, Genentech, and UCB. Amgen is focused on the discovery, development, and commercialization of medicines that address critical needs for people impacted by rare, autoimmune, and severe inflammatory diseases. They apply scientific expertise and courage to bring clinically meaningful therapies to patients. Amgen believes science and compassion must work together to transform lives. Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease is a global biopharmaceutical company focused on serving patients with severe and rare disorders through the innovation, development, and commercialization of life-transforming therapeutic products. Their goal is to deliver medical breakthroughs where none currently exist, and they are committed to ensuring that patient perspective and community engagement are always at the forefront of their work. Founded more than 40 years ago, Genentech is a leading biotechnology company that discovers, develops, manufactures, and commercializes medicines to treat patients with serious and life-threatening medical conditions. The company, a member of the Roche Group, has headquarters in South San Francisco, California. For additional information about the company, please visit www.gene.com. UCB innovates and delivers solutions that make real improvements for people living with severe diseases. They partner with and listen to patients, caregivers, and stakeholders across the healthcare system to identify promising innovations that create valuable health solutions.